All right, let's dive into a piece of technology that wasn't built in a factory or coded on a computer. Nope, this was a living, breathing engine that completely rewrote the human story.
So let me just ask you this. If you had to pick one single animal that put human civilization into hyperdrive, which one would it be? Now, you may be thinking a dog, maybe an ox, but the real answer is an animal that completely changed our relationship with speed, with power, and with distance itself. It was, of course, the horse.
So where does this story start? Well, you have to go back about 5,500 years. And this isn't a story about conquest, not at first. It's about a revolutionary partnership that started on the vast Eurasian steppes. Pinning down exactly where and when this all happened has been this incredible scientific detective story.
For a long time, all the evidence pointed to one place, the Botai people in what's now Kazakhstan. I mean, archaeologists found tons of horse bones, even traces of horse milk on old pottery. It seemed like a slam dunk. But then recent DNA analysis just turned everything on its head. It turns out the Botai horses, they weren't the ancestors of our modern horses at all. The real origin story, we now know, happened somewhere else entirely.
This new timeline tells a fascinating story. Around 4,200 years ago, over in the Volga-Don region of Russia, a new kind of horse shows up. And this wasn't just another local taming. This horse was different. It was a superstar. Within just a few hundred years, it spread like wildfire, completely replacing almost every other local horse population across all of Eurasia.
So, what was their secret sauce? Why this horse? Well, this wasn't just about taming an animal. You could call it an early form of bioengineering. The genetics show us that these early breeders were unbelievably sharp. They didn't just want a stronger, faster horse. They were selecting for very specific psychological traits. They essentially solved the problem of a wild animal's natural instinct to bolt by breeding for calmness, for obedience, and for a much lower fear response. They were literally engineering the perfect partner. Okay, so now humanity has this powerful, obedient, and willing partner. What happens next was pretty much inevitable. The horse went from being a source of food and a way to get around to becoming a terrifying weapon of war that would dominate the battlefield for the next 3,000 years, the cavalry.
And the first true masters of this new kind of warfare were people like the Scythians. They perfected a style of fighting that was just a nightmare for big, slow infantry armies. Imagine this. Hordes of riders on light, fast horses swarming your flanks, unleashing a hailstorm of arrows, and then just vanishing before you can even react. Their signature move was the Parthian shot, where they'd pretend to retreat and then twist around in the saddle to fire backwards. They solved the problem of facing a bigger army with pure, unstoppable speed.
This kicked off a full-blown technological arms race, but for riding gear. It starts with just riding bareback. Then you get padded claws to make it more comfortable. A huge leap forward was the rigid framed saddle, which gave the rider way more stability. But the real, honest-to-goodness game-changer was an even smaller piece of tech.
The stirrup. It sounds so simple, right? Just a little loop of metal hanging off the saddle. But this was a revolution. It solved the most basic problem of fighting on horseback: how to stay on. By letting a rider stand up and brace themselves, it turned the rider and the horse into one unified weapon. This is what made heavy lances and full-plate armor possible. It's what created the iconic, devastating charge of the European medieval knight. And the absolute peak, the ultimate expression of this 1,000-year evolution of horse-powered warfare was, without a doubt, the Mongol Empire. They took everything, superior horses, advanced tech like the stirrup, and brilliant organization, and combined it into the most effective military the world had ever seen. Just take a look at the Battle of Lignitsa in 1241. You've got a European army of 30,000 heavily armored knights going up against a Mongol force of only 20,000. On paper, you'd bet on the Europeans, right? But the Mongols used their classic tactics, those feigned retreats, the swarming horse archers, and they completely annihilated the larger, slower army. It was just a brutal lesson in how mobility and strategy can crush brute force. But the story of the horse is so much bigger than just the battlefield. Sure, cavalry could conquer territory. But the horse's real power was its ability to connect all that territory. It basically solved the problem of geography. It made the massive continent of Eurasia feel smaller than it ever had before. Honestly, the best way to think about it is that the horse was the engine behind the world's first internet. These vast networks, like the famous Silk Road, weren't just lines on a map.
They were the arteries that pumped goods, culture, and information across the world, and it was all powered by the horse.
And to get a sense of just how big a deal this was, look at this number: 80 to 90 kilometers. That's how far the average Mongol military unit could travel in a single day. To any other army at the time, to any merchant, that kind of speed was pure science fiction. It was a logistical miracle.
And the absolute crown jewel of this horse-powered network was the Mongol Yam system. This was way more than just a postal service. It was a masterpiece of logistics. A messenger would ride flat out to a relay station, jump onto a fresh, waiting horse, and just keep going. This system allowed messages and commands to fly across their empire faster than at any other point in human history up to that time.
And here's the key takeaway. When people move that fast, so do their ideas. The migrations of horse-riding peoples are what likely spread the Indo-European languages all across the continent. Religions, like Buddhism, traveled the Silk Road from India to China. And technologies, papermaking, advanced math, new art styles, they were all cross-pollinating, creating a much more connected, dynamic world.
So when you put it all together, the legacy is crystal clear. This partnership between humans and horses wasn't just some small step forward. It was a fundamental change in what it meant to be human.
A good way to describe the domesticated horse is as a keystone technology. What that means is, it wasn't just another tool. It was a platform. It fundamentally rewired our relationship with distance, speed, and power, and that created the foundation for countless other changes to happen.
You can see how this one partnership just sent ripples across all of society. It transformed warfare, it built global trade, it sped up communication, and it spread culture. But there's one more huge piece of the puzzle.
And that's farming. The invention of the horse collar was just as revolutionary for agriculture as the stirrup was for war. See, it let a horse pull a heavy plow without choking itself. A horse could plow way more land way faster than an ox. This solved the problem of farming the heavy, dense soils of Europe, which led to huge food surpluses, which in turn fueled the growth of cities and populations.
Which leaves us with one final thought. The horse was the keystone technology for millennia, the engine that solved the core problems of its day. So what's the horse of our time? What single technology is so fundamentally reshaping our world that 1,000 years from now, people will look back and say, that was the engine of their civilization? Thanks for watching.